The House of Light stood at the edge of the village like a quiet promise. Built with clay walls, wooden beams, and Nala's own hands, it wasn't just a school, it was a place of healing. Girls from nearby villages came in groups, some barefoot, some carrying fear in their eyes, just like Nala once did. But under her roof, they found safety. Nala was strict, yes. She believed in routine, respect, and hard work. But her discipline didn't come from cruelty. It came from knowing what chaos felt like, what silence could cost. She taught them how to read, how to write, but more than that, she taught them how to stand. Each day began with morning circle, where girls would share thoughts, fears, even secrets. And Nala would listen, nod, sometimes smile, and sometimes say nothing. Her silence often spoke louder than her words. Kafele, now an aging man with slower steps and tired eyes, started coming by the school. He would sweep the yard or carry buckets of water, never asking for anything. He didn't say much to Nala, and she didn't say much to him either, but there was something quiet between them, a kind of peace that hadn't existed before. He watched her from afar, realizing more and more that he had failed her, and trying, gently, to make space again in her world. But even with the laughter of children, the growing plants in the school garden, and the letters of thanks from parents, something still lived deep inside Nala, a Tsende's ember. The pain she had buried never truly left. It didn't show on her face, not in front of the girls, but sometimes in the stillness of night, when the lanterns were off and the wind whispered through the cracks in the window. Nala would sit by her desk, open her old journal, and stare at the pages. She didn't write much anymore. She didn't need to. The words were all in her chest now, sharp and clear. She never spoke of Malika, not to the students, not to Kafele. She had built something beautiful, something that could never be burned again, but the ashes of the past still clung to her. The school healed others, but her own healing was still a quiet, unfinished thing. And though she smiled, though she led with strength, no one truly knew what still burned inside the woman who had once been left tied under the rain. News travels fast in villages like Itoro. One morning, while the girls swept the front yard of the House of Light and Kafale fetched water from the well, a travelling trader stopped by with a cart of fruits and gossip. He mentioned it casually while chewing on roasted groundnuts. "That woman, the one who used to live here, Malika, she's in Mbali town, sick, looks like she hasn't eaten properly in weeks, staying at a shelter near the marketplace." The words hit Nala harder than she showed. She stood still for a moment, staring at the broom in her hand, then quietly turned and walked inside. She didn't ask for more details. She didn't say anything, but the name echoed inside her chest like a drumbeat. Later that day, a few women from the village came by with gifts for the school, some yams, handmade mats, a bundle of soap. As they sat under the neem tree chatting, the topic surfaced again. "Some say Malika's suffering is punishment," one woman said, shaking her head. "Others say maybe she's paid enough." Another leaned closer, her voice lower. "Nala shouldn't get involved. That woman nearly destroyed her. Let her suffer alone." The girls were nearby, listening with wide eyes. Nala overheard it all, but said nothing. She simply smiled, thanked the women for their kindness, and returned to the classroom. But her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the chalk. That night, Nala didn't sleep. She lay awake on her thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, listening to the night sounds, the rustle of dry leaves, the hoot of an owl, the distant cry of a baby. Malika. The name kept stirring memories she had buried for years. The slap in front of the village, the lies, the fire, the rope cutting into her wrists as she shivered in the rain, but also her stepbrother's face, confused and innocent, her father's silence, the fake tears that had fooled everyone. She wanted to ignore it. She told herself she owed Malika nothing. She had built a new life. She had survived, but her heart wouldn't stay still. In the dark, she sat up, walked to her small wooden chest, and pulled out the old journal. The same one where she had once written everything Malika did to her. She hadn't opened it in a long time. She didn't read it now either. She just held it close. In the following days, Nala went about her duties as usual. She taught lessons, tended to the garden, helped girls sew new uniforms. But something had changed in her eyes. Kafele noticed it. One evening, he sat beside her on the steps of the school and said quietly, "I heard too about her." Nala didn't respond. Kafele sighed and added, "You don't have to go near that fire again." Nala finally spoke, her voice calm but heavy. "Maybe the fire never really left. Maybe it's been burning here all along." He looked at her, unsure whether to stop her or support her, but Nala gave no clue of her next move. To the rest of the village, she looked the same, strong, focused, unshaken. But inside, her heart was a storm. She didn't know yet if she wanted justice, closure, or to prove to herself that she wasn't like Malika, maybe all three. And so, while the school buzzed with life and the village continued its rhythm, a shadow quietly returned into Nala's thoughts, bringing with it questions, memories, and a choice she knew she would soon have to make. The rain came heavy that night, with thunder shaking the skies and wind howling like spirits lost in the dark. The girls at the House of Light had already gone to bed, tucked under thin blankets while the storm raged outside. Nala stood by the window in her small room, watching the trees bend, her thoughts still tangled in the news from days before. Then came the knock, or maybe it was more of a thump. It was faint, almost drowned by the wind, but it was enough to make her step out of the room, grab her shawl, and move toward the front door. Before she could open it, she heard voices, frantic whispers from the older girls, then a scream. She ran outside, barefoot, into the rain. At the school gate, just beyond the faint glow of the lanterns, a figure lay collapsed in the mud. The girls stood back in fear, eyes wide. One of them cried, "She said your name, Miss Nala. She said your name." Nala stepped closer, heart pounding, unsure if she was seeing a dream or a ghost. The woman was soaked, shivering, barely able to lift her head. But Nala knew that face. Even after all these years, the sharp lines had softened with sickness. The proud posture was gone. Her hair was wet and tangled, her lips pale. And then she whispered again, so weak it was almost lost in the rain. "Nala." Kafele appeared behind her, holding a lantern, his face stiff and pale. He stared for a long time before speaking. "It's her," he said, voice flat. "It's Malika." Time seemed to freeze. The girls looked to Nala for answers, for strength. Kafele looked at her too, unsure what she would do. And Nala stood there in the storm, her past lying broken at her feet. She had dreamed of this moment before, many times, but never like this. Part of her wanted to turn away, to say nothing, to let the rain wash Malika away like the pain she had caused. Let the woman feel the cold, the fear, the helplessness that she had once forced Nala to endure. It would be justice. It would be fair. But something inside Nala refused to move. She looked at the girls huddled behind her, girls who had trusted her, looked up to her, believed she was different. What would they see if she left this woman to die? Nala bent down slowly, her shawl already soaked, and placed 2 fingers on Malika's neck, still breathing, barely. She turned to the girls. "Bring me dry cloths, towels, quickly." Some hesitated, confused. Others ran. Kafele didn't move. His face was unreadable, but his eyes looked tired. Nala didn't ask for his help. She carried the weight herself. Together with the girls, she brought Malika inside, laid her on a mat near the small fire, and covered her with blankets. The older girls watched silently, unsure of what this meant. Nala gave no explanation. Malika didn't speak again that. She slipped into sleep, or maybe unconsciousness, her breathing shallow, her body weak. Nala sat by her for hours, silent, staring into the fire, her mind filled with voices of the past, the journal, the beating, the lies, the rope in the rain, but also the choice she had just made. By morning, the rain had stopped. The sun rose slowly, casting light through the school windows. The girls moved quietly around the sleeping woman. Kafele sat under the tree outside, his hands trembling slightly. And Nala? She stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching the world wake up again. She didn't know what would happen next, if Malika would recover, if she would speak, if she would twist truths again. But she had made her choice, not out of weakness, but strength. She had chosen not to be like her. The girls would remember that, and so would she. Malika was moved to a small storage room beside the kitchen, the only space available that was warm and dry. Nala made sure she received basic medical care, clean bandages, a warm blanket, simple food. But she never spoke a single word to her, not one. Days passed quietly, but the tension under the roof was louder than any spoken word. The girls tiptoed around the space, whispering when they passed the storage room. The older ones remembered the story Nala had once shared in pieces, about a cruel stepmother, about survival, about silence that screamed louder than pain. Now that same woman was lying weak and coughing just a few feet away. Some girls were confused. "Why is she here?" one asked Nala during evening lessons. "Didn't she hurt you?" Another said with narrowed eyes. "Why didn't you leave her outside like she left you?" Nala looked at them, her heart heavy. She wanted to tell them the truth, the whole ugly truth, about the slaps, the lies, the hunger, the betrayal. But she didn't want the school she built to become a place for revenge. So she chose her words carefully. "She did hurt me," Nala said one evening, as all the girls sat cross-legged around her on the floor. The fire crackled softly in the corner. "And yes, she left me outside in the cold when no one else cared. But if I leave her to die the same way, I become her. And I promised myself I would never be that woman." The room fell silent. "I won't pretend I've forgiven her," she added, her voice low and steady. "Forgiveness isn't easy. Sometimes it doesn't come at all. But I can still choose mercy. Mercy is not weakness. It's power." The girls didn't argue, but their faces showed a mix of emotions: conflict, admiration, confusion. Mercy was a hard lesson, harder when the one being shown kindness didn't deserve it. Kafele watched everything from a quiet corner. He helped where he could, bringing firewood, mending gates, trying to make up for all the years he failed to see the truth. He offered to stay near Malika's room, to keep an eye on her, but Nala refused. "She is not your burden anymore," she told him. "She made her choices, and so have I." Every day, Nala passed the room without stopping. Every day she told herself she didn't care, that she didn't wonder if Malika was awake, or if she was watching her through the tiny crack in the wooden door. But each time she heard a cough, or the sound of movement, something twisted inside her. At night, Nala couldn't sleep. She wrote in her journal, just like she had as a young girl. But now, the pages were full of contradictions, rage and sadness, mercy and resistance. She didn't understand how she could feel so strong and so weak at the same time. The girls noticed her silence growing deeper. They didn't ask more questions, but their respect for her only grew. They saw her carry pain without spilling it onto others. They saw her teach strength without shouting. And most of all, they saw her face her past under the same roof, with her head held high. Malika never asked for anything. She never apologized. But the longer she stayed, the more her silence started to feel different. Not cold, not proud, just tired. Nala didn't know if it was guilt or just age, but something had changed in the woman who once wanted her gone. And even though Nala still refused to speak to her, she listened. Not to Malika's voice, but to her quiet. Because sometimes the silence of those who once hurt us says more than their words ever could. The whispering started in the corners of the dormitory, where the older girls gathered after evening chores. They had seen Nala's silence. They had watched her pass by the storage room every day without a glance toward the woman who had hurt her so deeply. And in their young hearts, full of loyalty and fire, they mistook that silence for permission. It began with small things. One girl placed cold water by Malika's bedside instead of warm tea. Another knocked on the door late at night, just to scare her. Then they started hiding her food, claiming they forgot to bring her plate. A few even whispered cruel things through the thin walls when they knew she was awake. "Witch," they said. "Monster, you don't belong here." They thought they were protecting Nala. They thought they were giving Malika a taste of her own medicine. But they didn't know Nala was watching. She noticed when Malika's tray came back untouched. She saw the way the older girls looked away too quickly when she asked simple questions. She saw the glint in their eyes that didn't belong in a place meant for healing. One rainy morning, Nala entered the room while the girls were sweeping the halls. She stood in front of them, holding a piece of dry bread and a bowl of untouched porridge. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with something fierce. "Who hid her food?" she asked softly. No one answered, but silence said enough. "Who poured water through her window? Who moved her blanket outside during the night?" Still, no one spoke. Some looked down. Others stared at her, defiant. Nala looked at them. These same girls she had rescued from broken homes, from silence, from pain. Girls who had once come to her for comfort, now becoming shadows of the cruelty they had escaped. "Let me tell you something," Nala said, her voice low and heavy. "I built this school so no girl would ever feel powerless again, so no girl would carry pain alone. And yet here we are, turning pain into a weapon. The room was still. The girls shifted on their feet, uncertain. "You think you're helping me?" she continued. "You think I want revenge?" One brave girl, barely 16, raised her chin. "We just thought she should feel what you felt." Nala stepped closer. Her voice cracked, not from weakness, but from truth. "I felt hunger, cold, shame. I felt hatred boil in my chest every night I cried myself to sleep. And do you know what it almost turned me into? Her." The words fell like thunder. "You don't heal by hurting more," she said. "You don't build peace with cruelty. We are not them. We are more." Tears welled up in one girl's eyes. Another tried to speak, but her voice failed. One by one they broke down, not out of guilt alone, but from the weight of understanding, from the realization that they had betrayed the very lessons they had learned under Nala's roof. Nala didn't punish them. Instead, she gave them a new task. Every girl was to take turns helping with meals, cleaning the room, and checking on Malika's medicine, not out of pity, not out of duty, but as a test of strength, of grace. And slowly, something shifted. They saw the woman in the room not as a villain anymore, but as a mirror, a warning of what pain can do when left unchecked. A broken person who had once broken others. Nala's message echoed through the halls long after that day. We fight darkness by choosing light. And in that moment, the girls learned what strength truly meant. It was a quiet evening at the House of Light. The sun had dipped behind the hills, leaving the sky painted in soft shades of purple and orange. The sound of the girls inside was hushed, their laughter muted after a long day. Nala sat alone near the old tree behind the school, watching the sky as it slowly faded into night. She didn't hear Kafeli approach until he was only a few steps away. He walked slowly, his hands shaking slightly, holding a wooden box. Nala turned when she heard the crunch of leaves beneath his feet. He looked tired, not from age alone, but from something deeper, a weight he had carried for years. He stood before her, eyes wet, and sat down without a word. For a while, they sat in silence. "I should have seen," Kafel whispered finally, his voice trembling. "All those years. I should have protected you." Nala looked straight ahead, saying nothing. The air between them was thick, filled with words left unspoken for far too long. "I thought she was just strict," he said, more to himself than her. "I thought, if I stayed quiet, things would get better. I thought you were strong enough to bear it." Nala's throat tightened. She wanted to speak, but her words were locked away behind the years of pain she had buried. So, she listened. Kafele slowly placed the box in her lap. "This was your mother's," he said, barely holding back tears. "I kept it hidden, thinking maybe one day, when I was brave enough." She looked down at the box, its wood worn smooth with age. Carved patterns ran along the sides, ones she recognized from childhood. Her mother's hands had touched this. Her heart quickened. With shaking fingers, Nala opened the lid. Inside were tiny tokens of a childhood half remembered. A beaded bracelet with her name, a dried flower pressed in a book, a small cloth doll she'd once cried for when it went missing. Nala held each item like it was a piece of herself she'd forgotten. Beneath it all was a folded letter, her name written on the front in her mother's handwriting. She unfolded it carefully. The paper was fragile. Her eyes moved over the words, slowly, each one sinking into her soul. "My sweet Nala," it began. "If you are reading this, then life has taken a turn I feared. I've seen the darkness in Malika's heart. She hides it well from others, but not from a mother's eyes. If I am not with you, know this. I loved you more than the sun loves the sky. Never believe the lies she might tell you. You are not a burden. You are my light. You are enough, always." The letter ended with a blessing, written in the language her mother had sung to her in as a child. Nala's tears fell freely now, silent, heavy, real. Kafela reached for her hand, but hesitated. "I failed you," he whispered. "I failed her too." She didn't move for a moment. Then, slowly, she placed her hand over his. "You were afraid," she said softly, "like I was, for a long time." He cried then, not the quiet, hidden kind, but the full, broken cry of a man who had carried regret too long. They sat under the tree until the stars appeared. The box opened between them, memories spilling into the night air. In that moment, something shifted. Not all the pain disappeared, but a door opened, a space for healing to begin. And for the first time in years, Nala leaned on her father's shoulder, not as a child seeking safety, but as a woman choosing to forgive. Nala sat alone in her room, the candle flickering low as the letter trembled slightly in her hands. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, soft but powerful, full of a love that had never faded, even after all these years. She had read the letter twice already, but this time, something in her heart opened. Her mother's message wasn't just a comfort, it was a key, unlocking the walls Nala had built around her pain. "You are not a burden. You are my light. You are enough." The words struck deeper than anything ever had. Nala could no longer hold back what she had kept locked inside for so long. Silent tears turned into quiet sobs. Her body shook as years of hurt, silence, and hidden scars poured out in the dark room. There was no one watching, no one judging, only the letter, the candle, and her mother's love surrounding her like a warm embrace. She cried for the little girl, who had once longed for her father's eyes to see the truth. She cried for the teenager forced to carry shame that was never hers. She cried for every insult, every slap, every time she was made to feel small. And she cried for Malika too, because somewhere in her, she finally admitted how much it hurt to be hated by the one person who should have protected her after Zawadi's death. By the time the candle had nearly melted down, Nala's tears had slowed. Her face was tired, her chest lighter. Something inside her had shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but space. A space for peace to grow. A space her mother's words had opened. Later that night, the rain began to fall outside, soft at first, then heavier. The school was quiet, the girls all asleep. Nala stepped out, the letter still folded in her hand, and walked silently through the corridor. She reached the storage room where Malika lay, weak and still, recovering. There was no sound inside except for the faint, laboured breathing of the woman who had caused her years of pain. Nala stood at the doorway for a long moment. She didn't speak. Her feet moved slowly until she reached the small wooden stool by Malika's bed. She sat down. Malika didn't open her eyes. She looked thinner, older, smaller than the monster Nala had once feared. Her hands twitched slightly in her sleep, and her face carried lines of suffering that hadn't been there before. The fire she once ruled with had burned out. Nala didn't speak. She didn't touch her. She simply sat there, listening to the storm outside and the quiet rhythm of Malika's breathing. Her heart beat steady, not with rage, but with a strange stillness. She didn't know what this moment meant. She didn't come to forgive, and she wasn't ready to forget. But her mother's voice echoed again. Forgiveness doesn't mean weakness. It means choosing peace over poison. Hours passed. The candle in the hallway burned low, and the rain softened to a quiet drizzle. Nala stayed there through the night, not as a daughter hoping for love, but as a woman choosing not to carry hate any longer. In that silence, something broke. Not violently, but gently, like a thread being released after holding tight for too long. The breaking didn't mean everything was fixed, but it meant the healing could begin. Malika lay weak on the thin mattress in the storage room, her body sunken and her voice barely a whisper. The fever had passed, but the weight of everything else remained heavy in the air. Days had gone by with Nala sitting silently near her, never speaking, never looking her in the eye. Yet every night she came, and Malika knew, deep down, that the silence was heavier than words. It demanded truth. That evening, just as the sun dipped behind the hills and the orange light spilled into the room, Malika stirred. Her voice, raspy and uncertain, broke the quiet. "Nala," she said, her voice shaking, "I don't deserve your time, but I need to speak." Nala didn't move. She continued looking at the floor, hands resting on her lap, her face unreadable. "I hurt you," Malika continued. "You don't have to tell me. I know it. Every insult, every lie, every bruise. I remember all of it, and not once did you deserve it." The words floated into the space like smoke, thick with the weight of years gone wrong. "I was not born cruel," Malika said after a long pause, "but I was raised in cruelty." She closed her eyes, as if summoning strength from a place buried deep. "In my village, when I was just a girl, I was treated worse than a stray dog. My stepmother used to beat me with a broomstick dipped in water so the bruises would last longer. My father, he was like yours. He never saw it, or didn't want to. I was told I would never be anything, that love was weakness, that survival was the only thing that mattered." Nala's hands tightened slightly in her lap, but she didn't speak. "I left that village not to run from the pain, but because I carried it with me," Malika said. "I thought if I had power, if I controlled everything, I wouldn't be that helpless girl anymore. And when I married your father and saw you," Her voice cracked. "You reminded me of who I was before I became bitter. You were full of light, hope, and I hated you for it." She turned her head, coughing weakly into a cloth, then continued, "I thought hurting you would give me peace, but it didn't. It gave me silence. And now, that silence has become my cage." Tears welled in her sunken eyes. She looked at Nala, who still didn't speak. "I don't expect forgiveness," Malika said. "I just wanted to tell the truth before I no longer have a voice to do so." The room fell quiet again. The sounds of the evening filled the space, the chirping of crickets outside, the soft shuffle of footsteps from the school hall. Nala slowly stood up, her expression unreadable, and walked to the window. She looked out, watching the sun disappear behind the trees. Her back was to Malika. Still, she said nothing. But Malika didn't need a response. For the first time in her life, she had told her story without lies, without blame. And in that truth, even without forgiveness, there was a small sliver of release. Nala stayed at the window long after the confession ended. Her heart was heavy, but not in the same way. The pain was still there, but now it had a name. And sometimes that was the first step in letting it go. The smell of smoke drifted through the air just before sunset. It was faint at first, a whisper of something wrong. Then came the cries. One of the younger girls shouting from the hallway outside the kitchen. Flames had caught on a curtain near the stove, spreading fast as panic rippled through the halls. The older girls screamed, grabbing each other's hands. Pots clattered, the air filled with chaos. But then came a voice, steady, strong. "Nala." She didn't shout, but her voice cut through the panic like a drumbeat. "Out through the back door! Stay low! Cover your mouths! Don't push!" Her calm was like a blanket thrown over the fire in their minds. The girls followed, each one holding onto the one in front. Smoke curled around the wooden beams, but Nala stayed behind, guiding every single one out before stepping outside herself. The last to exit was Kafel, coughing and wheezing, his arms full of soaked cloths. And just behind him, something no one expected, Malika, thin, trembling, barely able to stand. Malika dragged a crate of dried grain away from the flames. Her face was pale, lips tight in pain, but her hands didn't stop. She stumbled, almost fell, but still moved. When Nala saw her, their eyes met for a fleeting second. Malika's expression didn't ask for thanks. It didn't even expect to be noticed. It was just something she did. When the fire was finally put out by villagers with buckets, wet blankets and sand, the back wall of the kitchen stood blackened and smoking. A section of the roof had fallen in, but the rest of the school was untouched. Most importantly, no one was hurt. The girls sat outside on the grass, some wrapped in blankets, others holding hands and staring wide-eyed at the smoke. Nala walked among them, checking for burns, whispering reassurances. When one of the youngest started crying, she knelt and held her tightly. Later that evening, the villagers gathered outside the school, offering help. Some brought food, others tools or pieces of wood to repair the damage. And in the background, Malika sat quietly on a stool, her hands bandaged, her back hunched from exhaustion. Nala watched her from a distance. She remembered another fire, one that wasn't accidental, one that left her tied outside in the rain. The pain of that night still echoed in her chest. But now, as the smoke from this fire faded into the evening sky, something felt different. This fire hadn't destroyed. It had revealed. It had shown the strength of her girls, their courage, their unity. And it had shown something unexpected in Malika. A spark, not of cruelty, but maybe, just maybe, of redemption. That night, after the girls had been put to sleep in the common hall, Nala stood beside the burnt wall. Her fingertips touched the charred wood, still warm. She thought of her mother, her journal, the years of silence and scars. Then she thought of the girl who had once been her, lost, unloved, angry, and of the woman Malika had become, weak, but trying in her own quiet way to make things right. The fire hadn't taken anything that couldn't be rebuilt. It had only burned away what no longer needed to stay. And in that space, blackened but not broken, a new light would rise again. The morning sun had barely touched the sky when the sound of hammers and voices filled the school grounds. Nala stood with a scarf around her head, sleeves rolled up, directing the repairs with quiet strength. The burnt section of the school, once a mark of fear, was now surrounded by villagers, carpenters, mothers, even a few fathers, working together with the girls to rebuild. Laughter mixed with the hammering. The air smelled of fresh-cut wood and hope. Nala moved through the crowd, checking every detail. She didn't shout, didn't hurry anyone. Her presence alone was enough to keep the energy alive. Kafele brought bowls of porridge for the workers. Girls painted signs and cleaned windows. There was life again in the House of Light. Inside the small storage room, tucked away in a corner of the compound, Malika lay still. The sickness had taken more from her each day. She had spoken little since the fire. Sometimes she whispered things to herself. Other times, she simply stared out the small window toward the garden. But she always kept one thing near her chest, the old letter from Zawadi. That morning, as the sun warmed the earth and the repairs continued outside, Malika passed in silence. No cries, no drama, just a soft breath and then stillness. When Nala was called inside, she didn't rush. She stood at the doorway, watching the frail body that once caused her so much pain. Malika's hands were wrapped gently around the letter. There were no tears from Nala, no bitterness, just a quiet nod. Later that day, with only a few close villagers present, Malika was buried near the edge of the school garden. It wasn't a grand ceremony. There were no speeches. Nala chose the spot herself, close enough to honor the truth, but far enough from memory to allow peace. She placed a stone at the head of the grave. No name, just a smooth, unmarked rock. That was enough. The girls watched from a distance, curious and unsure. They had seen the worst of Malika. They had heard the whispers. But now they saw Nala, strong, unmoved, and calm, and they waited for her word. That evening, as the stars appeared, Nala gathered the girls under the large tree near the school's entrance. They sat around her, some leaning on each other, others with journals in their laps. The fire crackled softly beside them. Nala looked at each of their faces, some still bruised from fear, others wide with wonder. Then she spoke, her voice steady, clear. Forgiveness, she said, isn't forgetting. It's not saying what happened was okay. It's not pretending the pain didn't matter. Forgiveness is freeing yourself from what once controlled you. The wind moved through the branches above and the girls listened, silent and open-hearted. That's how we grow, she added, not by holding on to what broke us, but by choosing what we build next. The girls didn't clap, they didn't cheer, but their eyes told her everything. They understood. And in that quiet night, beneath the stars and the shadow of a rebuilt school, a new chapter began, not just for Nala, but for every girl who had once felt powerless and now felt seen. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts below. And if you want more powerful stories like this, subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching. Your support means everything.